Welcome to the Ithihasa channel. We had described about how Vidura grew up as an intelligent man who was an incarnate of Dharma. Today we describe how an amsha of Dharma was reborn as Vidura. Om Namah Shivaya, Om Nagendraya Namaha, Om Amme Narayana, Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya, Om Ganeshaya Namaha, Om Anjaneyaya Namaha, Swamiye Sharnamayappo, Om Guruve Namaha. So it was said that Vidura was an incarnate of Dharma Deva himself. So how did Dharma, the god of death, the god of impartiality, the god of truth, how was Dharma reborn, or a part of Dharma reborn as Vidura? So how was Vidura an avatar of Dharma? So let us talk about another story of a long time ago. So there was a sage called Mandavya, a very elevated sage, a rishi of very high tapasya and sadhana. He used to sit in a vow of silence in front of his ashrama, with his palms facing heavenwards, in deep penance for years on end. Around that time, there was a robbery in the kingdom nearby, and the dacoits, with the guards of the palace hot on their heels, were fleeing away and ran into this forest. Knowing fully well that soon enough the guards would catch up with them, these dacoits came across the sage Mandavya, deep in meditation, and noticed that his ashram behind was unattended. And suddenly they felt that if they hid the booty in the ashram, they could get away with it. And in the process of hiding the booty in the ashram, the palace guards caught up with these dacoits. And these palace guards started to question the rishi about who these people were. And the rishi was in deep penance in this vow of silence and didn't answer to their queries. So assuming that this rishi was part of this gang of dacoits, the guards took the dacoits along with the rishi to the kingdom in front of the king. The kingdom tried to ask this rishi about actually what his role in the robbery was. But this rishi in his vow of silence refused to speak. And the king felt that this rishi was part of this gang of dacoits, and as a sentence punished all of them to be impaled on spears kept at the palace gates. A very harsh sentence for such a small robbery, but I guess the king had a zero tolerance policy and wanted to create an example out of that. And so the dacoits and the Rishi Mandavya were impaled on spears and stakes kept at the palace gates. Of course, the dacoits died instantly, but the Rishi Mandavya, with all his tapasya and sadhana behind him, didn't die. And through the nights, impaled on the spear and deep in pain, he would call out to the rishis around surrounding areas and ask them to come to sing to him, to tell him stories of the past so that he would forget his pain. And these rishis from far and near came in the form of birds and sang to him through the nights to reduce the pain of this Rishi Mandavya. A couple of days later, when these guards came to take down the bodies of these dacoits, they found that the Rishi Mandavya was well and alive, in the pink of his health, of course, except for the spear that was going right through him. And they were flabbergasted. And they brought down this rishi, spear and all, into the kingdom of the king, not knowing what was happening. The king himself was flabbergasted seeing the rishi with the spear sticking out of him, and asked him who he was. The rishi still refused to answer. But realizing that this was no ordinary man, the king prostrated himself down in front of the rishi and at his feet and begged for forgiveness, and told him that he didn't know the identity of the rishi when he sentenced him to be impaled at the spear on the palace gates. And eventually the rishi spoke and identified himself as the great Rishi Mandavya, and forgave the king for what he did was done in ignorance. The king immediately summoned all his palace physicians and told them that they have to get the spear out of the rishi immediately. But the palace physicians deciphered that if they pulled the spear out, it could probably rupture some blood vessels, rightfully so, and the rishi would bleed to death, and that they would have the death of the rishi on their hands. So they decided to cut the spear at the place where the spear exited the rishi, leaving the pointed part inside him. And because this rishi had this pointed part of the spear lodged in him, he would henceforth be called Ani Mandavya. Ani means nail or the point of a spear. Probably to distinguish him from the other Mandavyas of the region. And so the great Rishi, who would henceforth be called Ani Mandavya, did more and more immense penance and attained the position of a great Brahma Rishi. At some point, he came to the court of Dharma Deva in Devaloka and walked into the court of Dharma Deva and asked Dharma Deva what was the reason for him being impaled on a spear. For he had done no wrong through his life. And if the cycle of karma was to be obeyed, there's no reason why he should be impaled on a spear. And far from that, he now has to live with the point of the spear in his abdomen all his life and live in pain. And Dharma was quite shocked. For at the instant, it didn't come to Dharma why such a thing would happen. But Dharma probably deciphered that it was due to an infraction caused by the Rishi much earlier in his life. And the Rishi said, I have done no such thing ever in my life. I have lived my life according to Dharma. I have been pious to a fault. I do not recall anything that I have done that I should deserve this impalement and this intense pain that I live with. And Dharma thought back and said, I think there was a time when you were a small child that you took a blade of grass and impaled an insect with it. It's difficult to say whether Dharma just brought it up out of his own mind or there was some truth in it. But this infuriated the Rishi far more than Dharma was expecting. An infuriated Rishi shouted at Dharma and asked him, how dare you take the sin of a child, an innocent child, and hold it against him, and hold it against me such that I am impaled with a spear and have to bear the pain for the rest of my life. And then the great Rishi Ani Mandavya, furious that he has had to bear the pain of the Ani inside him from the time of his impalement, furiously denoted that henceforth never shall a child below 12 be held responsible for his actions, and never shall a child below 12 be punished for his actions. And in that ferocity, he cursed Dharma. Dharma, the god of death. Dharma, the god of truth. He cursed Dharma, that he shall be reborn as a child of a Shudra. The Shudra that was denoted in those days just meant that the work done by that Shudra Varna would be different from the work done by a Brahmana Varna or a Kshatriya Varna or any other Varna. It did not denote that the Shudra was of a lower Varna or a lower level than the other Varnas. But the intense pain that he had to endure made him say something like this. Now for Dharma to be reborn, did it mean that he would die and be reborn? We had discussed the concept of the avatars in an earlier episode. The cosmic power that Dharma would have imbibed over the centuries through the use of the pranava would then have to be used to create a birth, to create that avatara, to create that amsha, which belonged to Dharma and which was conjoined with Dharma. And use of this cosmic power would drain Dharma immensely, bringing his powers down to that of a mere mortal. And that was the curse that would drain Dharma to the powers of a mere mortal. And it would take centuries more for Dharma to gain that conscious power through the cosmic power of the universe. And it so happened that the child born from this curse was the child Vidura, born of the great sage Krishna Dvaipayana, and his association with the maidservant or a Shudra woman of Ambika. And so, this child of a Shudra woman and the great sage Krishna Dvaipayana was the great Vidura, a man who held the Hastinapur kingdom intact, a man who was the conscience of the Hastinapur kingdom, who was the conscience of Dhritarashtra, who was the conscience of Pandu. And this is the story of how Vidura was born from the curse of Ani Mandavya on the great Dharma. Om Namah Shivaya, Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya, Om Nagendraya Namaha, Om Amme Narayana, Om Ganeshaya Namaha, Om Anjanaya Namaha, Om Guruve Namaha, Swamiye Sharanamayappo.